How did you attempt suicide? And what really put you at that point?
From a neurochemical standpoint, I was fucked. I had a lot of shit that I hadn't dealt with from childhood. I had no means of looking at that, and the only outlet that I had was now being taken from me. And there was a feeling that I would never be loved, and that was crippling. When I attempted my suicide, I had been in a big fight, drove to the top of parking lot 7, and stripped down out of my robe to jump naked. And while I was standing there, I didn't really have a connection to God or spirit or whatever you'd call that. Until that moment, I just felt this wash come over me.
Welcome to the Built for Growth podcast, and I am super excited to share this episode with you and introduce the guest, Kyle Kingsbury, and his amazing story. Kyle is a retired professional mixed martial artist. He fought in the UFC at 205 pounds. He's 6'4", and he was also on the Ultimate Fighter Team Nogueira versus Team Mir. Kyle is a first-generation farmer, and he also hosts the Kyle Kingsbury podcast. We talked about what led Kyle from football at Arizona State to fighting and the dark moments in between, including his attempted suicide. One of my favorite parts was when Kyle talked about his spiritual awakening and how exactly plant medicine played a role in that. I think I loved how open and honest Kyle is about his struggles and his realizations. He's this really inspirational guy, and he is out there doing his best to impact the world in the best possible way. So I hope you enjoy the episode, and remember, whatever it is, whatever's going on, you were built for it. Kyle, welcome to the Built for Growth, if I could speak, Built for Growth podcast. I swear that wasn't a tongue twister when I named it that, but anyways. So it's funny, we were just talking about this. Although we have both fought in the UFC and our paths should have crossed a number of times, like we've actually never, to our both best recollection, met each other face to face. But nonetheless, I'm happy to have a conversation with you again because I was recently on your podcast. I think it was November 14th that you put that out, and we really got to kind of know each other. And I realized that there are a lot of similarities, but I really got to be, you were asking me the questions. So I was like telling my story. Now I'm really curious because I saw your face light up on a few of my questions. Like, yep, I've been there, I've done that, I've had that experience. So I'm really excited to elaborate that today, and I'm excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here. It's awesome to be on the other side of the mic.
Do you still do a lot of interviews where you're being interviewed, or you're mostly interviewing others?
I mean, I've been releasing one podcast a week for 7 years, I want to say. There was a period of time when I was on it where we tried to do 2 a week, and I could handle that, but with everything else, I was like, this is a lot. So for guys like Chris Williamson and Joe Rogan that are just churning them out, I don't know how the fuck they do it, having other things to do. Like Joe does a lot of other things, so like he's got a work ethic that's kind of hard to comprehend. But yeah, I've been releasing one a week, and even that, that comes in peaks and valleys where I'll knock out 10 interviews in a couple of weeks, and then we've got a 2-month stack to sit on, and hey, we got to schedule people out ahead, that way they don't have to wait 6 months. But yeah, every now and then I'll sit on this side of the coin and get to be interviewed, and so that's always fun, especially when it's with awesome people.
Well, I love it. Well, let's talk about one of our similarities. What we have is sport, right? So obviously we're both fought in the UFC, but I want to kind of dial it back to your start in sports and kind of back to your childhood. How did you get involved in sports, and kind of take me through your journey into football? You played at Arizona State, right? Yeah. So take me through that.
Yeah. I will say that, my life was challenging from a mental, emotional standpoint, not necessarily from a physical standpoint, just in the household. And so I needed an outlet, and football was my first outlet. I think I started in Pop Warner when I was about 8 or 9 years old. I loved playing that. We had old school coaches where they'd tell you to grab grass. Literally, we'd grab grass with our hands and headbutt each other face to face. We were taught to tackle with our heads. All shit that's outlawed now in the game.
Thank God.
It was thankfully, yes, but it was a different time and a different sport, and it was something I really needed. I loved it dearly. It was something that was my way to. It was honest violence. It was legal violence where I could actually, just let the full fire out and not be in trouble for it. And it was a great channel for me to push myself to be better. And I had a lifelong dream of playing in the NFL. Fell way short of that when I walked on at Arizona State and sat on the bench. My whole senior year, I realized I wasn't going to play again, and was pretty disappointed in that. I still felt like I had a lot of athleticism left. It was one of the more challenging points of my life. I actually went through a really big dark night of the soul, depression, all that. And then coming out of that, attempted suicide even. And coming out of that, on the backside of that, was the first time I really thought, what do I want to do for me? When all the shoulds just kind of washed away. Everything that I was taught I needed to do to graduate college, to get this kind of degree, to go to this kind of job, that kind of thing, it all vanished in that moment. And that was really the first time where I started asking myself those questions without any other influence, without, my father's influence, my mother's influence, society's influence. And I didn't want to fight. I had fought growing up as a kid and loved it. It was before people understood flow states or anything like that. Fighting was oddly my quiet space when I was street fighting, because it just everything else zeroed out. I was so engulfed in the thing that nothing else really mattered. But fighting professionally is a whole different ballgame. So I didn't have any idea that I wanted to fight professionally. I just missed my team. I missed having a team. I missed having camaraderie. And I felt like training at 24-hour Fitness felt like masturbation compared to 100 guys that are next to you screaming for you to come up with your 500-pound back squat in the ASU training room. Like, it was night and day different. And so I knew I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, but I knew that's what I needed. And so I started training mixed martial arts after that. I met a guy who ran a local show in Arizona, Rage in the Cage, and he's like, you're tall, you're handsome, you're an athlete, fight for me one time pro. And if you like it, you keep going. If not, you can say you fought one pro fight. And I was like, all right, that sounds like a pretty good, that's pretty good bait. I'll take that bait. So
How much did you get paid?
$100. It was $100. Honestly, I'm gonna be perfectly honest. It wasn't that much better in the UFC. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. It really wasn't.
No, at that time there just wasn't money in our sport.
No, and it wasn't divvied out. Not other than to a few.
What year was this?
That was, I think, 2006 was when I started fighting, and then 2008 I got on Ultimate Fighter Season 8. So yeah, I won my first 2 fights in under 30 seconds, and I was like, shit, I should probably take this seriously. I'd only been training for 6 months. And I got to 7-0. I took my first loss, not really paying attention or giving a shit, just still kind of, hunky-dory, going about my stuff. I was training in MMA 3 days a week and lifting weights 3 days a week. I thought that was a training camp. And so my coach knew better, and he said, look, I can't put together a camp for you. It was before Arizona really became a prime hub for it. And he said, go home, go to American Kickboxing Academy. It's where you're from. I trained back in the day there with Frank Shamrock when he was there as the head coach. He's like, Cain Velasquez is there, Luke Rockhold. You've got, top 3 in the top 10 were in the welterweight division at AK at the time. Josh Koscheck, Mike Swick, John Fitch. So I made the move back home. I moved to my dad's. My dad had a little spot in his backyard that I could stay in. And not long after being there and getting my ass kicked by Cain every day, they offered me a spot on the Ultimate Fighter if I could drop to 205. I'd fought heavyweight prior to that. And, seeing that, Brock Lesnar and Shane Carman were cutting to 265, I was like, there's no other option. I have to make weight. And
what were you walking around at? What was your weight at that time?
When I played football, I got up to 268 at ASU. And I was taking everything under the sun to do that. When I started fighting, because of the demands, it was hard to stay above 240. So I'd slowly drop to 238, and then I'd slowly drop in a camp to 235. And then by fight day, I might be 233, 234 if I was lucky. That's on the lighter side, Even Jones is ballooned up.
Yeah, doesn't heavyweight start at, is it 225? Where heavyweight starts? I can't remember.
Anything above, it's 205 to 265 is technically the class. There's some organizations that have a cruiserweight now.
Yeah.
That's around 225 or 230. But that wasn't available to me. So I said, all right, let's quit lifting weights. Let's see if I can drop. I was able to drop. I lost my way onto the show. I lost my first fight in the UFC, but they saw enough potential. And because I was at a big camp, they allowed me to stay. And, that kicked off my MMA career.
So I want to circle back a little bit, and you kind of glossed over something I think that's really important. For one, I want to know why it didn't work out for football. And for two, I really want to know the struggle that you had with the attempted suicide. How did you attempt suicide, and what really put you at that point?
Yeah, we can dive into that. Football, I knew guys that started all 4 years, which is hard to do in Division I, and they didn't make it to the NFL. So, the idea that I could somehow, go to a tryout and still make it, having never really played more than a handful of downs, it just wasn't in the books. And I didn't want to continue in Arena League or anything like that. I thought the same way. I brought that mentality to fighting later too, and I will address the suicide piece in a second. But, it was my mindset, if I can't play in the best, then why hang around? And so I always said, if I drop below 500 at any level of the sport as a fighter, I'll retire then, because it's not baseball. My brain's on the line here, my body's on the line. And so had I not been as successful in Rage in the Cage, I would have retired then. If I wasn't as successful in King of the Cage, I would have retired then. Fought in the UFC, it was peaks and valleys. The second I came to 500, I knew if I lost that fight, I was out. And when I lost that fight, I was out. But going back to the time, college, we were the number one party school in the nation. And for everything I know now about optimization, I was doing the opposite. I had a naturopath prescribe me, 60 pills at a time, 10 milligram Valium, 2 milligram Xanax bars, hydrocodone, fucking whatever I wanted. And I told him I'm using this to sleep after a night of cocaine, right? And so the guy was just like, all right, this will help you sleep.
Oh, but that's such different sleep, right? Because that's not restorative sleep. That's like knock you out, but you don't go through all the REM sleep and the deep sleep and the growth hormone and all of that. So yeah, you're really working against yourself here, but please continue.
Yeah, and taking a pill to fall asleep at 5 or 6 a.m., what are we talking about here? You're not optimizing anything, So from a neurochemical standpoint, I was fucked. I had a lot of shit that I hadn't dealt with from childhood. I had no means of looking at that. And the only outlet that I had was now being taken from me. Realistically, that was it. Football, even though I didn't play in games, every practice was my game day. And I'd tell the starters that, and they'd be upset about it. Like, I'm going to fucking try to kill you because this is my game day and you're going to be better for it. And we were better for it. My coaches respected that. Eventually, the guys on the offensive line respected that, but I was a pain in the ass for them all season long. That was my game day. But losing my outlet, losing a team, losing really purpose and also identity. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was identified as a football player. That's all I knew. That's when I was introduced to people at parties. I played ASU football. I was a football player. Even before that, I was a football player in junior college. I was a football player in high school. I was a great football player in high school, and so having that gone and the idea behind it of myself as that thing, we see this now, with politics. We see this with woke ideology. You identify as who you want to fuck and how you want to fuck and all the different things. And it's like, that's not you at all, right? But I didn't have that at that point. And so that was pretty challenging for me. I was dating a girl at the time. We had I learned a lot from the relationship, 6.5 years on and off. But at the time, in that moment, I felt like, I couldn't be myself, and that if I was myself, she wouldn't love me for myself. And there was a feeling that I would never be loved, honestly, for who I was. And that was crippling. I had an underlying depression that I was bleeding out in football that would allow me to put on the happy face and go out and party and have fun. But there was a lot of pain inside that I hadn't really looked at. And I had no real tools for that. I had sat in therapy since I was 7 years old. And that kept me, that kept the water boiling, at a low boil. It kept it at a low boil. But it never really resolved anything. And all the anti-anxiety medication, that shit works, and it does nothing for the long term, right? It is perfect at quelling anxiety in the acute, but all it does is just stuff shit in the closet and keep it there.
Usually it's worse when you have to come off of it too, right? I mean, it's like living on a credit system.
Yeah, they're some of the hardest ones to come off for sure. So that's how, when I attempted my suicide, I'd been in a big fight, end of the season's over. I didn't even want to fucking finish school. I couldn't stand school at that point. I had only stayed in it to stay eligible for football. I didn't really want to graduate. I didn't want the degree and then to have to get a job like my parents did. They were both in sales, both 100% commission based. And that caused all sorts of stress because, we were rich one month and dead poor for the next two. And so, they butted heads like rams constantly. And I didn't want that for myself. I didn't want that for whatever family I was going to create. And that's all I saw at the end of the tunnel. There was no light, just this shitty future that I didn't want. And so reaching rock bottom, I guess, I took every pill that I had, all the Vicodin, all the Valium, all the Xanax. I dumped them all into a cup. I downed them all. It took me, I think, 3 full mouthfuls to get them all in. Drove to the top of parking lot 7 and stripped down out of my robe to jump naked. And while I was standing there, I didn't really have a connection to God or spirit or whatever you'd call that. Until that moment, I just felt this wash come over me, and it could have been chemical. It absolutely could have been the drugs. But I felt like the words "not yet" were imprinted in my body. And I didn't hear a sound. I didn't hear like the booming voice or any of that stuff. I just felt like the words "not yet" came through loud and clear. And I was like, oh shit, not yet. And I really thought about that. What does that mean for me right now? And it meant the peace that I'm seeking, I'll have that. But not yet. There's still more life to live. Like, just hold on. Go through more. There's more for you here. Stay here. Don't do it yet. You're going to have that peace. You're going to have that equanimity, but not yet. And so I was like, fuck, man. All right, I'll stick around. Tears are coming down my eyes. It's like, wow, all right. And the guard had followed me up. It was 3:30 in the a.m. I didn't realize I passed a guard there. And so he looks up, and all I hear is, oh, shit, you're naked. And I was like, yeah, let me throw on my robe, and I'll come down. I'm good now. And so I throw on my robe. I come down. And I just told him like, hey, I'm cool now, but I did swallow like every pill in the medicine cabinet. I probably need to go to the hospital. And so I woke up 36 hours later in the hospital. My family had flown in, my sister had flown in, and it was a really challenging point. But like I said, two things happened in that week in the hospital. One, I got to tell my family shit I'd never told them before. Like shit that really mattered to me. And with the understanding, you're not saying it for them. You're not saying it for recognition. You're not saying it for an apology. Don't have that as a reason why. Have it to get it off your chest and to be heard. And so I understood that, and I did that, and I didn't get an apology. I didn't get, admission. I didn't get any of that shit. I didn't get full-on denial, but there just wasn't that. It was for me. And the second piece was this pop of everything I'd been encircled with growing up. All the shoulds and all the ought tos vanished, and that's where I really got to get clear on what I wanted to do, what I wanted to create, and that search led me to fighting because of the fact that I was missing a team, I was missing camaraderie, and I still had a chip on my shoulder to remain an athlete. I was 23 years old. I knew I wasn't done yet. I knew I had years left in me. And, fighting actually gave me a reason to take care of myself because I still partied. Even when I got out, I thought it was still, no big deal. I'm feeling good now. I'm doing the right thing. And I'd be a good boy for 8 weeks in camp, meditating, reading books, reading anything I could get my hands on that would help me be a little bit more optimized, enhance my recovery. I was diving into Wim Hof, Dr. Kelly Starrett's mobility stuff, doing sprint work with Remy Korchemny, like any of the greatest people I could work with. Victor Conti I was working with on altitude training. I was a sponge when it came to that knowledge. And then after the fight, I've been a good boy, let's let loose. And I knew how to let loose with the best of them. So it really was, a boxing coach that I had, Wheatsy, you might remember him, Wheatzelin, called him Wheatsy. He was a cut man.
Yeah,
he was our boxing coach at AKA. Yeah, he was our boxing coach at AKA before he became a cut man full time. And he would bring us out to the reservation for traditional sweat lodge. We'd do Temescal and Anipis. And we worked on that stuff for probably 2 years, really just grounding me in ancestral wisdom, indigenous wisdom, and teaching me about respect and reverence for my body, for the earth. And then I asked him, when are we going to use La Medicina? And he just burst out laughing and said, I've just been waiting for you to ask. And so he started guiding me with psilocybin mushrooms and eventually with ayahuasca. And, that kind of came in tandem while I was fighting. So when fighting ended, I had these things to fall on. I no longer identified as a fighter, and I wasn't stuck on the image of that being me. I didn't identify with it at the time.
Yeah. Wow, it's a lot to unpack, and I can tell this is your story because you kind of cruise right through it, and some parts of it just jump out at me, and I'm like, wait a minute. So take me back to 7-year-old Kyle. You said that you were seeking therapy at 7. So was this something that, as far back as you can recall, or at least till 7, that you were struggling with? And were your parents aware of it? They must have been if you were seeing a therapist. I mean, they were taking you to see a therapist. Like, what were the signs?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the signs were I had either get an A in class or I'd fail. Like that was one of the first signs. If I liked the class, I could do really well in it. I showed signs of intelligence, but I also didn't give a shit for most of the classes. I really didn't. And I fought all the time. I'd get sent to the principal's office regularly. This was before zero tolerance laws, so you actually could scrap on the playground and, just get suspended for a day or get detention, that kind of thing. And, I think the first guy I saw at 7, his name was Dr. Perlmutter. I forget his full name, but he was cool. He'd have me do puzzles and shit, and he just wanted to see like, how does my brain work? What is my learning style and things like that. And I felt a genuine sense of like, this guy's cool. Like he's somebody I can talk to. I probably saw him on and off for a year, maybe longer, but there was comfort there. And like I said, my parents fought a lot. And so having an outlet like that in addition to a physical one, which would come later from football, really made a big difference. Fighting made a big difference. That was a hell of an outlet too, when I was young. But I think, because of the way how my parents fought, because of the consistency of it, I had thought about killing myself at 7. I'd think of different ways when I'd lie in bed at night and think about, could I use, a rifle? Could I reach the rifle with the short arm that I have? And that was always, for me, it was a way, and I truly feel for people that are really depressed because I understand, and I feel for people when they actually pull the trigger. Like I understand it. What I saw as a kid when I think about that was like, I have a button I can push that ends it all. Like I have a button I can push that relieves me of everything. And it was interesting, thinking back on that 7 was when I started having thoughts like that. They came and went, it wasn't all the time. It's not like I'd plan shit out or leave notes for people or any of that. It just, life would go on and I'd go on. And then eventually something would come up that was good. And I'd ride that wave for a while. But yeah, with football being kind of this thing that once I got it, I clung to it. With that going away, it was a big deal. It was a big deal for me.
Yeah. I think what I understand about children and being a parent now, my daughter's 6.5, and I think about, how similar, how young and innocent she is. And I think that children will internalize and have some sense that it's their fault, or that maybe if, I guess that's what I was going to ask you. Did it feel like the fighting had anything to do with you, or did you internalize it in a way? Was part of you thinking about, if I just had push this button to end it all, then everyone else will be happy? Was it a thought like that, or was it kind of more just like, I just don't think I want to be here anymore?
Yeah, it wasn't, I didn't think it would improve the situation. I thought for a very long time, my parents are not meant to be together. I have one little sister who's a year younger than me. And when my parents got divorced when I was 13, it hurt her. She was 12. It really hurt her. I had been waiting and praying for it for years at that point. I remember my mom asking me when I was 10, and I was like, yes, what are you guys fucking doing here? You can't, neither one of them would back down from one another. And sorries would come way too fucking late. And just listening to them talk, one would throw a jab verbally, and it was just like everyone's on eggshells, constantly. That's a hard place to live, and I didn't think it would improve their situation, but I thought of it as improving my situation for sure. I just thought like that, here's the alleviation, that I can find right now if I need it, and so that's where I'd fantasize about that at a young age.
Yeah, I would say we have some similarities in that my parents fought a lot too when they were younger, and they're still together. Must be by the grace of God, because I certainly had the similar thoughts as you. Is like, would you guys please just get divorced already? Like, this is insanity. And it took me a really long time. I think that I still struggle actually with commitment issues, because I'm very, very loyal, but I'm also still, part of me is still scared to make that final leap of like marriage. I'm still not married. And although I love Johnny to death, I was in a 9-year relationship before that. I was like, do not even think about proposing to me. Like, it was terrifying, because I thought, if that's what marriage is, I never want that. I never want that. And a lot of times I felt very stuck, scared, confused. And so I began disassociating, I think. This isn't a formal diagnosis. This is just a self-reflection. It's the skill set that I started developing, was to be somewhere else, like an out-of-body experience, if you will. So when the fighting would start, or even if I would get in trouble, I remember I had this way of relaxing my eyes to where everything would be kind of blurry, and I would just go numb, and I would be somewhere else, like I was floating above my own body. And I think growing up in such a stressful environment a lot of the times in me also pushed me to find a place where I did feel like I could have everything that I needed and also become what I didn't have. And I think that's why I was so drawn to wrestling. I mean, I always loved sport. I always liked moving my body. I loved soccer. I liked track. I played volleyball. I always enjoyed those things, but nothing hit home for me like contact sports. And even though I was mostly getting my ass kicked because I was mostly wrestling guys and wrestling on a guy's team, I felt like something like came alive in me, and there was a certain sense of, just becoming what I didn't have, I guess. I almost maybe... Gosh, I'm sure glad that I didn't grow up in this generation, because I think maybe at the time, had there been the wrong people around me, that maybe they could have convinced me that I was meant to be a boy, and I don't think that was the case at all. I had a lot of things that I liked that typically boys liked, but I think that was, again, because of the lack of male security in my life. I think that I wanted to become what I didn't have. And I know we talked a little bit about that on your podcast, but just hearing you talk about the situation at home and how we develop these maladaptive coping skills, and how we fall into patterns, or we do things that we look back and say, why now? You know, you don't always have the perspective at the time. I never did get into drugs. I was always scared of drugs. My mom really instilled that in me very young. I was afraid of them. I started drinking, and I would lean on alcohol sometimes, but I developed eating disorders. So that was kind of my form of control, like being able to have some sick, twisted control. And I guess when you feel like the world is spinning out from under your feet, sometimes you just need something in your life that you can hold on to, that you can control, that you can do, that you can escape in one way or another. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about your stint as you kind of brushed across it. You were doing drugs, you got all these prescriptions, you were on testosterone, you were trying to gain weight. What did that feel like when you were on this cycle of uppers, downers? I mean, were you very aware at that time? Do you have great recollection of the things you were going through? Is it a blur? What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a nightly thing. It was a weekend thing. So that in my mind made it cool. You know, it's like, it's not, I knew people that were out every night of the week. Football, even when football ended, I still didn't go off the rails and still kept it to weekends because I still wanted to train during the week. I still I still thought I was taking care of myself on some level. And maybe I was. But, you know, realistically, so many of these things kind of go hand in hand. Like alcohol gets you down, and then Coke picks you up, and then it's a fucking balancing act the whole night, going back and forth with it. And there's a good feeling to it. And there's also just a kind of a, man, the party's been over for 2 hours and I'm still going with like one other person. You know, there's a deadness to it. And I could feel that, but I couldn't really realize it yet. You know, it took me working with plant medicines to actually see that for what it was. I would, you know, my girlfriend lived in Arizona. I would go to camps at AK. And so I'd live for 2 months at a time, either at a friend's house or, you know, in a garage somewhere, one of my homies' garages, and I'd stay there. I'd do my training camp. I'd be dialed in, eating perfectly, you know, meditating every day, not even watching TV unless it was like YouTube of Fighter or something like that. And then I'd go home, and because of ASU football and now being in the UFC, you know, I'd get free everything, free Coke, free whatever. So even after the suicide attempt, that was still my way to party. It still felt like this is a good time. Let's do it. And it wasn't until after I was introduced to psilocybin where I actually came home and I was like, this feels stale. This feels like the same shit every single time. And it feels like every time I come home, everyone that I'm doing this with is in the same fucking spot I saw them before I left. Right? Like no one's going anywhere. It's like people are just treading water in the pool, saying like, isn't this great? We're going so far. And you're like, you haven't gone anywhere. What do you mean we're going far? Like, what the fuck are we doing? And sadly enough, you know, a lot of people I know from college are still in that fold, some of which have died. You know, I lost 3 friends to opiates. I had a couple buddies that were addicted to OxyContin, couldn't get it anymore, and started working with heroin and then took too much. I lost a cousin to opiates, you know, like it's a shit thing. I mean, that doctor I worked with, he's killed multiple patients. He had to go to jail, rightfully so. But you know, those I would consider bad drugs. Psilocybin and ayahuasca I would consider good drugs. My rule of thumb is anything that leaves you more whole than when you started. So if I wake up tomorrow and I feel good, not just okay, but I feel better than I did the day before, that's where I'd put the class with right use, with right set and setting. I'd put psychedelics in there. MDMA and some other things could fall into there with the right set and setting, the right use and the right dose. Anything can be too much, but it wasn't until I had those experiences, those altered states, where I could actually go back and now see like, oh shit, this isn't what I thought it was. You know, like this is you know, it's just not, it's not leading me anywhere, and it is the same thing over and over again. I'm just pushing the bliss button, you know, like a rat in the cage who's got, you know, if I hit this lick, I get a dopamine kick. And I could really see that it wasn't fulfilling, and so that's kind of what led to my split with that partner I had for 6.5 years. Which, you know, lots of synchronicities happened for that to take place as well. But I'll just tell the story briefly. I had bought a wedding ring with one of my Fight of the Nights. I had purchased the down payment for a wedding ring, and because, you know, I was making 10 grand a show, 10 grand to win. That's 20 grand a fight. Forget the 10% to coaches, the 10% to management, and all the money the IRS takes, and 13.3% to California. If I won all 3 fights in a year, that was 60 grand. And I'd get a fight of the night, I might not fight the rest of the year. So I got a $40,000 bonus for fight of the night. It was 60 grand for that fight. And I said, if I don't buy the wedding ring now, I'm not going to have the money to do it later. So I put the down payment on the wedding ring. And the second I did that, I could feel all the nerves, what you're talking about, the fear of commitment, but also, what if this fails? I don't want this to fail 5 years from now when we have kids. I want to know now. So I actually made a prayer. Even though I had that experience on the rooftop, I didn't have any communication with God at that point. So I made the prayer, God, if you exist, let me know if this is going to work or not. And make it so fucking blunt that I can't just say, that's coincidence, or who knows if that's a sign or not. Like, make it crystal clear. If it's a yes, make it crystal clear. If it's a no, make it crystal clear, please. And I went to bed that night, and the very next morning, she broke up with me. And I was like, damn, dude. I was like, are you serious right now? And she was crying. We had a joint bank account. We were living together. We were everything but married. And she's like, aren't you sad? And I was like, yeah, I'm sad. But last night, I had mushrooms, and I made this prayer to God, if you exist, and all this shit happened. And I'm just like, and then you break up with me. And I was like, I see it clearly. Thank you for doing what I couldn't. You had the balls to see our relationship for what it was. You saw, we have grown apart, and I didn't want to see that. I didn't want to see the pain in that, and that allowed me to move on and to kind of move beyond the crew that I was with and, the antics I was up to. And 6 months later, I started dating, my wife, mother of my children, woman I've been with for 13 years. And so, it's crazy how life unfolds like that. But when I've got messages, they've been crystal clear, and that was one where it was definitive, like, holy shit. Yes, I hear you loud and clear. It's not going to work. I see it now, and I can see all the reasons it wasn't going to work. I've been very lucky and fortunate in that respect. These hard moments have graduated me to deeper levels of awareness and catapulted me forward.
Damn. So much to unpack there. Let's talk about your experiences with psychedelics, because I'm really interested in that. Now, you say that a lot of messages that you got were crystal clear. Have you felt like there were messages that took a lot of time to decipher and go through, and kind of what has your journey been like with plant medicine, and what do you think you've gained from that? How have you transformed in that journey?
Yeah, I'll give a few. A lot of people will say, especially when you first get into it, I've got buddies, that are kind of new on the train. My trajectory was the same as most people. I had beautiful experiences in the first handful of them and wanted to beat the fucking drum. Like, I wanted to stand on the top of a mountain and say, ayahuasca exists. No one's talking about it. There's this guy, Aubrey Marcus, who's been on Joe Rogan's. He's the only guy talking about it. There's books, but you have to know exactly where to find it. Like Jeremy Narby's book, DNA and the Cosmic Serpent. Graham Hancock's written about it, but no one's talking about it. And at the time, no one really was. And I felt like beating the drum. And through a number of experiences with it, similarly to my experience in the club, I noticed that a lot of people were showing up that I'd seen over the years with the same issues, the same intentions, looked like they were treading water. And I was like, maybe it doesn't work that way for everyone. Maybe people don't actually fix themselves, or maybe it doesn't fix us, but it just shows us the way to live a better life. And it's up to us to actually take those steps and do the work to live better. And so that was an eye-opener for me. And then as time progressed, I've been a coach for Fit for Service for the last 6 years with Aubrey Marcus and a couple other awesome people. We travel all over the place, and we host events with 150, 200 people, and we do awesome shit. We give people altered states of consciousness legally through breath work, ecstatic dance, and a number of other things. And I've really enjoyed that. And I've also seen quite a few people go off the fucking rails with good drugs, right? With plant medicines or otherwise. And so, now as a 42-year-old father, I look at those things quite differently. They are, Dr. Dan Engel, who's a close friend of mine, he says, when you're doing psychic surgery, you better have somebody with a steady hand, right? You don't want the guy with the shaky hand doing surgery on you, especially psychic surgery. And I've seen things go wrong enough times for me to say, this isn't something I want to beat the drum about. Not anymore. It can go either way, and it really does depend on who you have working with you. What are the just like a black belt, you'll understand this, and your listeners will too. I got my black belt in 2016 in jiu-jitsu. It was 2 years after I retired from fighting because I love jiu-jitsu and I wanted to finish what I thought as a jiu-jitsu practitioner would give me my black belt. And we moved twice in 2017. We moved from California to Vegas, and we moved from Vegas to Austin. When I was in Vegas for that short stint, I trained at Robert Drysdale's, and I had no delusions of grandeur. I didn't think by any means that I was going to beat Robert Drysdale. But I thought, I'm 235 pounds, I got a 550-pound deadlift, and I'm a black belt. It's going to be close. And it was so far from close. It was such a brutal ass beating. I felt like it was comical to me. I mean, I was gassed for 2 fucking rounds. I had to take off. He goes, "You okay?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I go fucking in the corner. I prop my legs up and I lay down. My legs are high on the wall. And it took me 10 minutes to catch my breath. He was breathing through his nose. He wasn't even breaking a sweat, and he could tap me every minute on the minute. It was like clockwork. And he's been training in jiu-jitsu longer than I've been, or he's been a black belt longer than I've been training in jiu-jitsu. So like, understand, there are levels to that. Just black belt doesn't mean shit. There's black belts on black belts on black belts, right? And I never really got that until I got it. There's the same for practitioners, curanderos, maestros, people who serve medicine. A lot of people in the West are like, this is my calling. I went to the Amazon. I was there for 6 months, and now I'm going to serve medicine. And people get fucked up. Like, seriously, like, you could lose your mind if that goes wrong. And I've seen that a lot. And so, like, a lot of people, when I used to hear this speech from people that were in the plant medicine game, I'm like, come on, enough with the disclaimers, like, let's just get to the juicy shit. But I have seen that a lot. And I understand now why they preach caution. And there are levels to black belts. You don't want to sit with somebody in plant medicines who's a white belt or a blue belt. And so I'll just say that as far as my trajectory of working with shit, I probably sit with medicine once or twice a year now. For a while there, it was monthly. For a while there, it did do a lot. It took me probably 10 journeys with ayahuasca to quit alcohol. I just didn't see it until I saw it. And I was like, damn, when I drink, it's not pain that I'm covering up, it's fear that I'm covering up. I would drink when I was afraid, and I drink when there was financial issues or any of that shit, and I was never an angry drunk or an asshole. I would have fun. It was a party, it was a celebration, but that was meant to cover that fear. And it took me 10 journeys to actually fucking see that. So it doesn't come, you don't rip the Band-Aid off all in one whack. It's like peeling a layer of the onion each time you sit with the medicine constructively. And so in many of those journeys, even from the very start, my first ayahuasca sit at the reservation with Wheatsy, the very first vision I had after throwing up violently, I became my wife, and I relived, it was before we were married, I relived every argument we had ever had. And I could see it from her angle. And I was short, I had breasts, I had the long blonde hair, and I was staring up at Kyle and yelling at Kyle in a way that Kyle actually could understand for the first time. And it was always love. It was always love in every single thing. She could see me mistreating myself. She could see me drinking when I was afraid. She could see me eating like an idiot, thinking that was somehow celebrating the win or the loss for that matter. And she could see the things I couldn't see, and it really was out of love. I used to think like, oh God, here she's going to nag me again about wanting to stay out late with my friends or X, Y, and Z. And it was just plain to me. It was like decoding a foreign language. And, when I came out of that vision, I was sobbing. Like I couldn't believe it. I couldn't talk about that experience without crying for weeks. It hit me that hard. And, that was something that took a long time to unfold. It's not like we wouldn't argue after that. We would argue after that. And then I would still have, my old, no, I'm just digging my feet in the ground. I'm right. And over time, because of that vision, I began to think, well, what if she's right just a little bit? What if there's one piece of this where she's correct? Can I try that for a moment? Can I just refrain from being defensive and just receive what she has to say and hear her? And we've been through a lot of challenges in our relationship, for sure. Tons of challenges that I said yes to, that I wanted us to go through. And from that made us better. I mean, I had to read Nonviolent Communication, and in that I understood, here's a pathway to understanding. Even if somebody's speaking at me violently, I can understand them. I can see, this is what happened in your mind. This is how it makes you feel in your mind. Everyone knows those first two, right? But it's the last two. What is the need that's not being met? And is there a request? Is there a way that I can meet that need that will satisfy your need? And so those final two are really the piece of it. If she gets hot now about something, let me just see, all right, you could be correct here in some way, shape, or form. Relax the defenses and allow it. And what is the need that's not being met? And so, that takes practice, and it still takes practice now. I'm not perfect, but knowing that was over a decade ago, like that, at that particular point in our time, like we wouldn't be married if it wasn't for that. We wouldn't have the relationship we have now if it wasn't for experiences like that. We both saw both of our children before we had them, on medicine, and got to communicate with their soul. And I knew my boy was going to be a boy before he came here. I knew my girl was going to be a girl before she came here. They gave me their names, so there's so much there that I really just bow and respect to the fact that, God in my mind has woven these things in through nature in such a beautiful way. But they come, with a heavy price tag, and you have to have respect. You have to have the utmost reverence for it and the right use. And if you do that, there can be harvest from it. But they can be fucking horrifying. Like they can fuck you up big time.
And have you had it be horrifying? And tell me what ayahuasca is again, because I'm familiar with psilocybin, and of course I've heard of ayahuasca, but sometimes I get these confused on exactly. So what is kind of the ritual in a nutshell?
Yeah, psilocybin is the mushroom that most people are familiar with. The red and white mushroom you see in Super Mario is the Amanita. That's not typically something that someone would use. You know, shaman from Siberia supposedly would feed that to reindeer and then drink their urine, and they'd take all the tannins out of it so that way they wouldn't get sick and they could have a psychedelic experience. But that has a different pathway. Most psychedelics are tryptamine based. They work on the serotonin system, and they're quite visual. So like you can have open-eyed visuals. If you close your eyes, you can be in a different place. You can leave your body. Scientists would call that hallucination, something that's not real. In my opinion, they are visions, right? They're and they can be premonitions of something that's to come in the future. They have been in the past for me, not always, but sometimes. And the visions can illuminate parts of ourselves that want to be seen, parts that, and that's the thing, if you're taking psychedelics, like in the 60s, people took shit to get high. And then all of a sudden, I got to relive this trauma. Like I didn't want it to go that way. That's the deal. You don't have control over where it goes. You have to say yes to that. You have to surrender to it. And, ayahuasca is the tea from the Amazon. It's a vine, Banisteriopsis caapi, and it's mixed with a number of other ingredients, but typically something with DMT in it, like chacaruna or I'm blanking on the name right now. Psychotria vitreus, I think is the name of the scientific name for it. But it has DMT in it. One has the MAOI, one has the DMT. MAOI allows the DMT to get into the brain, and you've got an experience for 4 to 6 hours. It's a nasty tasting brew, and it's an incredibly grounding one. It is earth medicine. Psilocybin can be very out there, ET, fucking out of body, and odd. And ayahuasca feels like you're tethered to the heart of Mother Earth. It's a different experience. And I've had great experiences with both. I've also had hellish experiences with both. I had an experience of what I would literally call hell on a very high dose of psilocybin. I did a solo journey. I'd listened to a guy named Kalindi Ai, who was a black dude from Detroit. He was a martial artist, lifelong martial artist, and really grounded, really beautiful understanding. A lot of his videos are still up on YouTube. I almost had him on the podcast, but he passed away in 2020 or 2021. But he had been taking really high dose psilocybin journeys, and I thought it was ridiculous the amount he was taking. But in listening to him and watching his videos, I thought like this guy actually could be onto something. So I did a high dose journey. Say again?
How much taking?
30 grams of penis envy mushrooms. So penis envy is a pretty potent strain. 30 grams is a couple grams more than an ounce. So yeah, I mean, Terrence McKenna said 5 grams is a heroic dose. This guy was saying 20 to 30 grams is a whole different level. And that what he proposed is that there's no ceiling. If somebody could work their way up to 100 grams, it would be a different experience than 50, which is a different experience than 20. And in my experience, he's 100% correct. But that's a buckle up. There's no control. I didn't have a body for 3.5 hours. It was like a 3.5 hour DMT trip for that matter. And what was revealed to me was all of my fears.
Is DMT the one that's really quick?
Yeah.
That one's
DMT is like 5 to 10 minutes, but it's full on.
But it feels like you lose concept of time, right? So you could feel like it's a lifetime. Kind of,
absolutely.
Right? I've heard.
Absolutely.
Okay, I've heard this. I've never experienced DMT, but I'm very curious. So go ahead.
Yeah, I would say DMT has benefit, but there's never been a DMT journey of mine where I started writing shit down and I was like, "This is how I'm going to better myself."
Yeah.
Like it's just too quick for it.
Yeah.
Whereas psilocybin, I've got pages of notes in a journey, a journey journal where just on my journeys I'll write down things that come from it, and sometimes not. Sometimes it's just painfully obvious what I need to do, but. Yeah, that 30-gram journey, my wife and I had miscarried in between our first and our second born. And so in that journey, I grounded up, I'd fasted all day, I drank the medicine, and I was solo in my room as in a guest room in the upstairs, just like Kalindi recommends. I had my playlist set, I had a bucket in case I was going to purge, and I just buckled up, like, let's see what happens. And I had a very beautiful experience. Probably for the first hour, and then kind of this dark wormhole wormed out from the wall, and I was looking at it like, what the fuck is this, a portal? And I just looked into it, and it looked like infinite blackness, infinite darkness. And I just finished a book called The DMT Dialogues, where Graham Hancock, pretty much all the who's, Dennis McKenna, the who's who of psychedelics wrote in that book about DMT, and they had dialogues on the conversation of these things. And one of the things they said unanimously was that if you come across a dark entity, if you come across the devil himself, instead of running or trying to make it stop, ask what they're there to teach you. There's always some medicine, no matter how you look at it, and there's something to harvest there. And so looking at the darkness, having literally just finished that book a day before, I was like, can I go in the darkness? Yes, I can. And I forgot everything that had happened before that. I go back to drinking the medicine, and I could feel like I could talk to the kids, to our kid in her womb and my son, and And our little girl, I'd check in. Oh, she's cool. Like I could telepathically communicate with her. And I was like, this is fucking rad. I can talk to my daughter right now. This is so cool. And then I'd feel like, red lights flashing. Something's wrong on the fucking space shuttle. I'd sprint downstairs and open the door. And she would have a miscarriage right there in front of me. And it was pretty fucking gruesome, like blood exploding everywhere on the walls. And this isn't like a dream where it's kind of hazy. This was like 16K, holy shit, blood's flying into my face. And she blames me for it. And it was just like, what the fuck? And then I'd go right back to drinking, and it would loop and loop and loop and loop for an undescribable amount of time. And once I understood there was a pattern, like, oh, I'm replaying the thing over and over again. And, at the end, it was like, all right, now she explodes. It's my fault. All of consciousness dies. My fault. Like once I came to terms with those things and I truly, fully surrendered, then it would go into the next phase. And I had about 5 levels of this. I think the first one's bad enough. So I'll leave it at that. Initially in the first couple stages, they were very conscious fears that I had. As it progressed, there were a lot of unconscious fears that I had around simulation theory, shit like that. It was just, those had to play out at an indescribable amount of times. And no way I could actually know how many times I went through that. It could have been fucking 3 minutes, but it felt like eternity. And there was no way out unless I fully surrendered. And once I finally did, then I didn't care anymore. It was like it just squeezed every ounce of care and fear out of me through the lived experience. And I went through those 5 stages and I came out, it was 12 midnight and I was like, holy shit, is it over? 3.5 hours, but it felt forever, And so I took a cold shower, couldn't feel it. I was in disbelief. I thought I was still dead and that I was picturing that I had a body. And I went over and I touched my son who was in his room and he just melted like, ah. And I was like, holy shit, I'm fucking alive, right? It felt literally like Ebenezer Scrooge, like, holy shit, I'm alive. What do I want to do? Scrooge coming after the 3 ghosts. And that was a rebirth that I never could have expected because I didn't think I'd have to go through hell in that way to do it. And I haven't since touched 30 grams of mushrooms or anything near that. But that is a dose at which, people can take far less. I had a buddy take 1 gram and it looked like he, was teetering on the verge of psychosis. He was going to break from 1 gram of penis envy. So, to say, my 30 is another man's 30 is not the case. Everyone has different receptors in the brain, different microbiome, and how we interact with those things is wildly different. That's why we need to enter with caution and step up slowly. But yeah, that was probably the deepest hell experience of my life. No question.
How did these experiences form your relationship with God and spirituality?
Yeah, like I mentioned, it took me some time to actually build up some form of communication. And I think for people, for non-believers, for atheists and scientific materialists, they'd scoff at that. I don't hear things back when I'm talking. It is a one-way communication, but I'll ask questions. I'll make prayers in a way that I hadn't, even when I first got into plant medicines, I wasn't praying, and now I feel there is a very great benefit to prayer because I know that answer will come back to me. It will reveal itself in one way or another if I just hold the prayer. And then it's really a fool's errand for me to try to think through all the fucking ways something is going to pan out. I've had a number of times in my life where I didn't know what was going to happen next and I took the leap of faith and it panned out. For example, when I quit fighting, I didn't know what I wanted to do after that. I had nothing in savings. I owed the IRS 50 grand because I didn't put down one of the fight of the nights. I just slipped my mind. I didn't put it down. I spent that money instantly. When I did taxes, I didn't have a tax guy. So I went through and I was just like, oh, this is what I made this year. And they're like, nope, you forgot this 40 grand and you owe us taxes on us and we're penalizing you. I paid them $1,000 a month for probably 10 years to pay that off. So that's what I left the UFC with, a debt. And I lived in my mom's garage for 5 years while fighting professionally. That to me wasn't exactly making it, but I had nothing else. I just knew if I continue here, I'm not going anywhere. And because of the plants, I realized I don't have to hold on to this. I can see what I want to do. I had worked at a strip club on the weekends twice a week, pretty much the entire time I fought professionally. And that paid the bills. It paid the bills when I was hurt. A lot of injuries. I had a shoulder surgery that took me out for almost 2 years. I've had 2 orbital blowouts that took me out for 9 months. And that just twice a week, I could go in there, I'd make cash. That would pay the bills and put food on the table for me and Tosh and eventually for me and Tosh and my son. But it was the leap of faith knowing hey, I don't have to know what I want to do. All the medicine showed me was just continue to do what you love. Whatever you're drawn to. And really I've had Mark Gaffney on my podcast several times this year. He wrote Return to Eros and he talks about the 12 Faces of Eros. On the podcast, allurement is a big part of God. It's a part of consciousness. And so what I was drawn to was what the plant medicines were reinforcing in me. Continue to lean into what you're drawn to. And I was drawn to all things health and wellness. I didn't have a podcast at the time. I went on Rogan's a year later on 2015. And, he's like, hey, start a podcast. And I was like, dude, you tell that to everyone and their mom. Why? So many people have podcasts. He's like, no, seriously, you got a lot to share. You should start a podcast. And it took me another year to do that. But when I did in 2016, not long after that, we had our move to Vegas. I wanted to make my way out to Paleo FX. I met Aubrey Marcus there. I already had a podcast. He brought me in to be to take over the Audit podcast, the Total Human Optimization Hour, as their host. I started designing supplements in on it, because I had a wealth of knowledge on supplements and all things optimization. I was the office guinea pig in a sense, trying out all things. I was still young too. I retired at 32. So at 35, I still had a lot left in me to really push myself towards. And I think, those leaps of faith have reinstilled in me that it's ridiculous to try to think, because I wouldn't have guessed that we would have moved twice. I wouldn't have guessed that I'd meet somebody and totally hit it off on an airplane flight and fucking move out to Texas and work with, one of the best supplement companies in the world. I also wouldn't have guessed that starting a podcast would lead me to these positions and lead me to meeting awesome fucking people, But literally one yes on the road led to multiple other yeses. And so my life's unfolded in that way, and I credit that entirely to God. I credit that entirely to me having the trust and the faith to say yes when I didn't know what was going to happen.
That's really powerful. I feel like I've had a similar story when I just decided to say yes to things. And in my journey, that's with wrestling, it's with fighting, it's with leaving a toxic relationship, it's with reconnecting with people, reconnecting with God, reconnecting with self, getting out in nature, plant medicine. Although I don't have nearly the experience that you do. I've only taken mushrooms at a higher dose, and I think it was only 3 grams, which was plenty for me. Once, and it blew my mind. I just realized the levels of connection that we have, and I'm so intrigued to try to continue to tap into that. I've since microdosed. That's occasional, maybe not even as often as once a month. Sometimes it's 2-3 times a month, that I'll just microdose a little bit. But it's heavy work. I do want to say, at least with my experience, that it's heavy. You know what I mean? Like it's a lot of work to take plant medicine with intention, I think, at least in my experience. And I've done ketamine one time as well, and the same thing. It was kind of a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of moving through traumas, a lot of learning about myself and the connection and the earth and the world and the universe and all of that. And so it was probably 2+ years ago that I had my deep experience with psilocybin. And although I've thought about doing it again, and I certainly think that I will soon, I also hesitate in a respectful way. It's not that I'm afraid of it. It's just that I know that I need to prepare, because I know that it's going to teach me something, and I have to be ready to receive that. So just a little, precursor there for people, just a little warning. It's, don't go out and swallow a handful of mushrooms and think it's going to be great. It can be hard. It can be heavy. Real quickly, is there any person or people or group of people, or did I understand you right that you also help guide people in a way? You said you kind of travel around and you help people with plant medicine, because I think I want to maybe provide people with a little bit of guidance or tools so that they don't necessarily get with the wrong people. I think what you said was really important about that. You don't just want to go out and, the blind leading the blind in something like this, because it is powerful and it's intense. And I think that it should be dealt with the right way. So do you have insight or experience of how maybe people can do this the right way if they are going to?
First, let me clarify. I'm not even a black belt when it comes to plant medicine. There's guys that have hundreds. Dan Engel's got 500+ journeys under his belt. I have 30 with ayahuasca. I have hundreds of psilocybin journeys and other things, but I wouldn't qualify myself as a black belt. And I don't guide people in that because of my own experience with it. In Fit for Service, we guide people into altered states of consciousness through breath, through various forms, without plants, without chemical assistance.
That's really powerful too. Actually, breath work is amazing. I've had some really extrinsic, intense moments just through breath work and hyperventilating, and then hyperventilating. Oh my goodness, if I could speak. And then holding your breath, and then that can be really powerful.
Yeah, I laughed at it the first time I did it. I was like, well, I want to know all paths that lead up the mountain. So I'll do it because I want to, and some people are adverse. You know, there's people who come from addictive backgrounds and are like, I don't want to touch a chemical. I don't care if it's organic. And I'm like, cool, let's try this for them. Let's see if it works. And I was fucking floored. Like, I was like, wow, this is an absolute out-of-body experience. It's highly visual. And I'm grabbing stuff from it. You know, it was educational in the same way that a plant medicine journey would be. And, you know, uniquely, I was in control. I had my foot on the brakes or my foot on the gas, depending on how hard I wanted to push myself in the breathing. And if I wanted to make it stop, I could make it stop. You know, I didn't want it to stop, but it's a cool thing knowing that exists. And so those are the ways in which we've guided people. And we guide people in very practical ways too. I've been teaching a lot of holistic health and things on how the body and the mind and spirit all interlace with one another. And so this is really what I'm pushing towards. Fit for Service is going to change next year. You know, we'll still be coaching people as a community. We'll have our community online. So if people are interested, you can go to fitforservice.com. But if you're interested in plants, my favorite place to go to is Soltara. Soltara.co is in Costa Rica. I have no affiliation with these guys, but in my opinion, they're the best that I've worked with. They fly Shipibo shaman into Costa Rica. They also bring them up the river, or I'm trying to think of my maps in my head of Peru, but they get them out they have a new place that's near Cusco in Peru. And so, you know, working with the Shipibo, or one of the longest running ayahuasca cultures, you have people that have made it their entire lives to work with that. The last people I sat with were a husband and wife. The husband was in his 50s, wife in her 50s. He had been serving for 30 plus years, her for 15 plus years. I asked why the discrepancy, and she said, I had to raise our kids. I was like, that's gangster. So as soon as her kids were old enough, she went into serving medicine with him. And those two sang in a carousel around the circle, Icaros, in a way that was just like nothing I'd ever experienced before. You know, they're absolutely dialed in. It is their life's work. And at Soltara, they've got a number of translators and people that are there that are co-facilitating apprenticing with the medicine, that maybe are, you know, low-level black belts that want to be high-level black belts, that have made it their life to be in service of that. The facilities are awesome. There's air conditioning. It's a big fucking deal. Ayahuasca is hard enough by itself. It's nice to go back and sleep with air conditioning, you know, as opposed to being in the Amazon. But and they've got organic food. I mean, the whole thing is really top to bottom one of the best experiences you could have with that. Their care before, during, and after is really important too. So they've worked with Dennis McKenna and a number of other people who are on their board to make sure that integration is key, and that there's journaling prompts and ways in which people are told, get out into nature every day for an hour this week, even if you've got work. You know, like make it your priority to be in nature for an hour each day. And in those ways, we can keep some of what, you know, we can take with us some of the things that we gain from being there. You know, I know people, you know, some people are working with others with psilocybin and things like that, guys that have fought before. I had Ian McCall on the podcast. You know, he was fucking awesome. He's working with some different people, high-level folks, but not necessarily a guy you can just hit up online and sit with. But I think Soltara is a place you can go. Anybody can go there. And they have a good vetting process to see, like, what are the current medications? Like, be honest on that form. It may not be for you. Tell the truth and find out if it's for you or not, right? Don't lie your way to get your way in there. But that would be the best. That would be my place to start. Certainly before doing any solo journeys, I would get at least a few. I had years working with Wheatsy before he passed away, where I was guided, and I had somebody who had years of experience. Wheatsy was a medicine man. He wasn't just a boxing coach. And you know, that care and that apprenticeship with him allowed me to do the things that I've done solo, because I had trained with him for a decade, you know, before I really started venturing off on my own.
I love it. Well, we're coming to a close, but there's a couple things that I want to make sure to address with you. One, I think it's so cool that you're a first generation farmer. So I just want you to talk a little bit about, like, what kind of acreage are you on? What are you doing with that land? What is it like being a first generation farmer? Pros and cons. I
mean, ayahuasca reconnected me to nature. When I was living in my mom's garage, right when I first started working with it, I had to plant everything. I was like, Mom, can I plant in your backyard? She's like, sure. So we had a 1/4 acre in Northern California, and I just started putting fruit trees in. And then she had like a row of vines by her driveway, and I was like, let me take out those vines and put in a raised bed. She's like, sure. So I did that. We were growing pumpkins, watermelons. California's nice. You can grow damn near anything there. It's not nice politically, but it is nice from a grower standpoint.
I know. I struggle in Vegas. I live in Vegas, and I'm like, oh my gosh, things get fried so easily. But I've got some pretty good green onions going, so there's that.
There's peppers. Peppers
and
really well in the desert,
yeah,
right?
peppers, rosemary. Yeah, I've grown a few.
But yeah,
things,
we've got 118 acres. I was drawn to nature from my work with plant medicines, and I always paid attention to regenerative agriculture. Paul Chek was one of my first mentors and coaches in the UFC. I didn't met him until after finished fighting, but he'd wear shirts that said "I love dirt," and he really was a guy talking about the microbiome and the health of the soil 20 years before anybody. And so I'd vote with my dollar. I'd buy things like that. I'd go out to Rome Ranch. We'd split a half a bison, bring it home, hundreds of pounds of meat, stick it in the freezer, and we'd live on local regenerative beef or local regenerative bison for a year. But it wasn't until 2020 when I was like, holy shit, like they could fucking shut down the world. Like I need to, as a father and a provider, I need to know where our food's coming from. I need to have a place where we can grow our own food and a place where we can keep the doors open. Like Texas and Florida were the first to do that via the UFC. UFC went to Jacksonville, Florida, and then to Houston, Texas in 2021. The rest of the world's sitting there like everyone's gonna die, and nobody fucking died. And these are people with comorbidities who are drinking and not your healthiest picture perfect Americans, and no one flopped over. And really with what we were doing in Fit for Service, we offer a lot online, but it doesn't compare to what we do face to face. And so like that, knowing that was a crux of how our business operated and what we do with people, with breath work, with all the things, I really wanted a space in which we could do that. So it was a huge blessing getting to be a part of this farm. Like I said, we've got 118 acres. We ran cows and sheep for the first couple of years, but through drought, the sheep really did best. So we sold all our cows. We got more sheep. We've got about 100 ewes now, 200 chickens. We've got a bunch of livestock guardians. We've got a handful, a dozen ducks, a few geese, and it's just been rad having all these animals out here, rotating them, being a part of that, having the kids clean chicken stalls and do farm chores, and being able to explore in nature. We've got red deer, red stag, and black buck, and the black buck those are horns, so they don't lose those, but the antlers from the red deer drop every year, and so the kids will go out hunting for antlers. Can we find them when they ditch them? I grew up, in a city, and I had maybe 6 months where I was in Central California on 8 acres. And I felt like that 8 acres was infinite. I felt like it just stretched forever. So knowing that I can give that gift to my children where they can have, a high fence around 118 acres and can go off and be alone with a walkie-talkie and get to explore and do all these things and participate in the work that it takes to run a farm, I think is a really special thing.
You're just outside Austin, right? Outside Austin,
yeah,
Texas?
We're 30 minutes south in Lockhart. We're the barbecue capital of Texas.
Oh, yum. Give me a reason to come and visit for sure. It'll be the barbecue down there, man. So good. A couple of your favorite podcasts. I've been listening to some of your show since I was a guest, and I've really enjoyed it. So I'm so glad that not only was I able to be on there, but it's awesome conversations. You have some really brilliant people on. But what's a couple of your favorites? What would you recommend?
I'll tell you right now, the podcast I did with Dr. Alexis Jasmine Cowan was phenomenal. She's a PhD from Princeton. She's an understudy of Dr. Jack Kruse. A lot of people will listen to the Jack Kruse podcast and either turn it off or listen to it all the way, but they have question marks because a lot of questions I asked Jack Kruse, he had a lot of vitriol, which was funny. It's worth listening to just for that, even though we're on the same team. But his understudy, Alexis, was just phenomenal. She brings a PhD's mind into the study of his work and really understands light and mitochondria better than anyone. So when we talk optimization, longevity, performance, where all these things intersect is around mitochondria and how we create energy in the body. And I think that's one of her specialties. It's something that I paid attention to for a long time. So it was really awesome to get to hear it from her in such a concise and eloquent way for 90 minutes. I love that podcast. I'll have her back on. If you want to introduce you guys, I'm happy to. I love Tim Larkin. Tim Larkin is a Vegas guy. His book, When Violence is the Answer, was a phenomenal book. And it really captured one of the reasons I got into sheepdog training with Tim Kennedy and one of the reasons I wanted a farm, from a protection standpoint, one of the reasons, that I have an EDC, right? I carry every day because of the teachings in that book, When Violence is the Answer. And it's beautifully written. It's gut-wrenching at times, and it's, fucking fist-pumping, white-knuckle the steering wheel. Yeah, like you feel fucking pumped when the good guys do it. But real life, the good guys don't always win. His book really shows the full gauntlet of how violence can turn really bad for people, and there's no one out to protect you but you. That's really what it boils down to. So I'd loved having him on the podcast. He had really cool stories that he shared that weren't in the book. He shared on the podcast, and he was just he's become a great friend and an excellent teacher. And I love his book and loved him on the podcast. Lastly, I'd say Mark Gaffney has been incredible. I've had him on 6 or 7 times. We really uncover. We're doing one of the every time we podcast is one of the 12 faces of Eros. So he'll spend 35-40 minutes lecturing on one of these faces of the divine, how consciousness works from the subatomic all the way up to the celestial. It comes from his book, A Return to Eros, but if people aren't, don't want to buy the book initially, just listen to the podcast and see if it resonates. We have many of them, and we're going to finish off. We'll have, I think, 13 or 14 by the end of the year, or by the end of next year. Lastly, Paul Chek, he's one of my mentors. We've done a number of 3-hour episodes. He's got a phenomenal coaching group he's doing called Spirit Gym. He, to this day, is one of my favorite people on earth. He's got so many great teachings. He's for sure, the most well-read, well-learned person I've ever come across who's connected that in a grounded way. He, at 63, could lift me under the table. And I know, because on his 60th birthday, we lifted weights together. He's way stronger than I am. And he's 165 pounds. Just this buff old man, who's absolutely dialed in. We had Tai Chi and we've done plant medicines together. One of my heroes to this day. So check out the podcast with Paul Chek, Mark Gaffney, Tim Larkin, and Dr. Alexis Cowan.
Beautiful. I'm also a fan of Paul Chek. He's really cool. I've listened to a few of his episodes too. Spirit Gym is awesome. So, and he really comes across as so genuine. Something that I appreciate. I think what's the beauty of a podcast platform and why I decided to start one myself was in part because on social media, we don't get as much of our voice out there as we would like. I think there's too much of the machine behind the wheel, people, speaking the truth and getting their accounts canceled and, even just trying to be real and have their own perspective on something or talk about something and be curious, which is, I think, what we need to do more of is we need to have more hard conversations and more, difficult things that we talk about as people. We learn to really talk about those things. So it was a beautiful conversation with you today, Kyle. I appreciate you. In closing, is there anything that you have coming up that you'd like to the people to be aware of outside of listening to the Kyle Kingsbury podcast? Or
Yeah, thank you so much. A couple things I want to turn people on to. My website's revamped, kingsbu.com, KINGSBU. We'll be launching 2 things next year. One, I'm going to have my own online community, which will be great, where I'll teach everything I've learned over the years from an optimization standpoint on the physical, the mental, emotional, and the spiritual. And it'll really go through those 4 categories every 3 months. So 3-month blocks starting in January on the physical and then working 3 months later into the mental and habit form and all that good stuff. Best practices, Q&As. So we'll dive into all those things. I've learned a lot even since retiring from fighting on how to train. And there's been a lot of times where I questioned returning just because I had learned how to take care of myself so much better, in the absence of fighting. But it's nice to be able to teach that now. I'm excited for that. Full Temple Reset is something I do each year with my partner, Eric Godzi. We do a 5-day fasting mimicking diet right here on the farm. We walk people through it. We fast with you. We get in the sun on the ice bath every single day. I put people through the paces on mobility. Godzi puts people through the paces on Jungian psychology, dream analysis, Jungian symbology, all sorts of cool shit. So people get, fed from a fire hose for 5 days and they can take that home and unpack it, having reset their metabolic rate and made themselves healthier along the way. So look for that February 15th, fitforservice.com, and check out kingsbu.com for my upcoming community.
I love it. Thank you. Great conversation. I appreciate it and look forward to the next one. And I'm going to start following these things. I want to come down and do a 5-day fast and learn about all the plant medicines and just experience, and continue to learn on the things that you've experienced. So thank you for sharing that with me and with the listeners today.